Counter-Narrative News, delighted to bring another episode in our special series on the amazing revolutionary Claudia Jones. We continue to quote from page 10 from Carol Boyce Davis's 2011 published book called Claudia Jones Beyond Containment. This is entitled Autobiographical History, writing to the leader of the party of which she was part of the leadership as well, of the Communist Party of USA, to Comrade Foster. It starts, the date is December the 6th, 1955. To quote, "To Comrade Foster, dear Comrade Foster, the following is the autobiographical, personal, political, medical history that I promise to forward to you. Personal. As a child of 8, I came to the United States from Port of Spain, Trinidad, British West Indies. My mother and father had come to this country 2 years earlier in 1922 when their economic status, which were middle-class landowners on my mother's side and hotel owners on my father's side, had been worsened as a result of the drop in the cocoa trade on the world market from the West Indies, which had impoverished the West Indies and the entire Caribbean. Like thousands of the West Indian immigrants, they hoped to find their fortunes in America, where gold was to be found on the streets, and they dreamed of rearing their children in a free America. This dream was soon disabused. Together with my 3 sisters, our family suffered not only the impoverished lot of working-class native families and its multinational populace, but early learned the special scourge of indignity stemming from Jim Crow national oppression. My formal academic education on American soil began when I entered public school, entering 4A. I have early recollections of being hurt by youngsters of my own age who mouthed anti-West Indian propaganda against me and my sisters. By the time I reached junior high school, I had formed friendships and became integrated in the student body and was nominated in Harriet Beecher Stowe Junior High for the highest office in the school and was subsequently elected mayor. The form of student administration of this particular junior high was patterned after the then established pattern of the New York City administration. One incident I recall with some pride today, namely that running with me then as president of the Board of Aldermen was a young Chinese girl. Numerous teachers tried to pressure me to refuse her as a running mate on the grounds that she was Chinese, and that had the situation been reversed, this would not happen in China of that day. I refused to be drawn to or to accede to any such narrow concept, choosing instead to have her as my running mate, to use the phrase that I exercised my peremptory challenge. We were elected by an overwhelming majority of the students, proving the teachers wrong and showing the internationalist approach of the student body. I began to wonder why there was wealth and poverty, why there was discrimination and segregation, why there was a contradiction between the ideas contained in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, which contravene its precepts of the pursuit for all of life, liberty and happiness. My mother had died 2 years earlier of spinal meningitis suddenly at her machine in a garment shop. The conditions of non-union organisation of that day of speed up, plus the lot of working women who are mothers, undoubtedly the weight of immigration to a new land where conditions were far from as promised or anticipated, contributed to her early death at the age of 37. My father, who together with her had come earlier to America, was left to rear 4 young girls, the oldest of whom was 14. I am the second child of my parents. This was during the days of the Great Depression. Because of my pride, I didn't ask friendly teachers to help me with a graduation outfit at which I was to receive high honours, including the Theodore Roosevelt Award for Good Citizenship, and officiate as mayor of the school, choosing instead to stay away, sending them some lame excuse while I bawled my eyes out in humiliation and self-pity. I was later to learn that this lot was not just an individual matter, but that millions of working people and Negro people suffered this lot under capitalism, if not identical in one degree or another. Following my graduation from junior high school, I entered Wadley High School. Here I was confronted with Jim Crow in the classrooms and in the social life of the school. White kids would borrow notes from me in school, and then on leaving the school would turn their faces the other way under pressure of the Jim Crow society. Teachers with audacity would hold Negro students after school, asking if we wanted to make an extra dollar by doing domestic work for them, or as they not so quaintly put it, whether I wished to wear a pretty apron at their own social affairs, or they would select poems in dialect and ask Negro kids to read these pointedly. While I even then had, as do other Negro youth, a searing indignation for these things, I didn't know what they were. I didn't know that they were part of a conscious plan designed to perpetuate the national oppression of Negro people in the US, of which these incidents were reflections of the badge of inferiority perpetrated on the Negro people in the North, with the more hideous features of lynching, poll taxes, crop-lien laws, and economic strangulation devolving on the Negro people in the heartland of their oppression in the Black Belt of the South. My formal academic education in a bourgeois sense ended with my graduation from Wadley High School. 1 year before my graduation, however, in the midst of the Great Depression, where I was one of the so-called lost generation of American youth, I contracted tuberculosis of the lung. My family's economic condition had worsened, as had millions of American families, native and foreign-born and second generation. My dad, who was an editor of an American West Indian newspaper, lost his job, and also later, when he became a furrier and had to guarantee our support, became a superintendent of an apartment in Harlem, where I lived all my life in the US. In the room where I slept, it was later discovered that an open sewerage flowed, and undoubtedly it was this dampness that contributed to my contraction of TB. I was sent to Seaview Sanitarium from Harlem Hospital at the age of 17, where with pneumothorax treatment for my condition, I fully recovered, since fortunately my sputum was never positive. I was there for 1 full year. There too, I had an opportunity to read avidly, to think deeply about the social ideas instilled in me by my mother and father. My mother had left the Catholic Church, in which faith we were baptized from early childhood, choosing to become a Bible student. Since her alert mind rejected early the hierarchical teachings of Catholicism, my father's social ideas instilled in us were that of pride and consciousness of our people, of our relation to Africa, from which my antecedents sprang, to our interrelationship to Caribbean independence, the dream of San Simeon, great Caribbean patriot, to the new recognition of the struggle for Negro equality in the US, linked indissolubly, as I later learned, with the freedom and equality of the American trade unions and the working class as the future class of society. One incident I remember while in Seaview, namely when I gave blood transfusion voluntarily, since I was her blood type, to a young Italian woman patient. This created quite a stir in the hospital on the question of black blood and white blood. Many of the white patients looked for days to see if the young Italian woman, who was eternally grateful to the point of my embarrassment, to me would turn black. One of the first hospital speeches I ever heard was from a young Jewish doctor who, in the midst of this scientific ignorance, stood in the middle of the ward and gave a lecture to the interracial patients, asserting the inviolability of blood types as the antithesis of any false teaching on race. Upon recovery, I completed the last term of high school at Wadley. Upon graduation, I went to work in a factory, since college was out for me and I had to help support myself and contribute to the family larder. My first job was in a laundry, where I observed, under the incredible, to me then, conditions of overwork, speed up, etc., in the heat of summer, young Negro women fainting regularly because of the unbearable conditions. I didn't want to become like them, so I went to work in a factory. But being unskilled, my job was setting nail heads with a toothpick, a small jar of paste, and placing these in the nail head setting. Boredom and ennui set in, and I had to quit this job. Besides, the pay was about $14 a week. Next, I got a job in Harlem millinery store and lingerie shop as a sales girl. This continued for quite a while, about 2 years or so. These were the years of the Ethiopian War and the invasion of Mongolia. During this period, 1935 to 1936, I worked on a Negro nationalist newspaper, where I wrote a column, circulation about 4,000 to 5,000 copies, and had a weekly column called Claudia's Comments. My job consisted there also of writing precis of the main editorial comments on Ethiopia from general commercial press, Negro rights, trade union press, etc. To my amazement, on attending one of their meetings of the nationalists, I saw my boss reading my preface to the applause and response of thousands of community people in Harlem, men and women. When the next day he would come in and tell me what a big Negro he was, I would challenge his facts. What he did was to read books on Ethiopia all day and fuse his accumulated knowledge with my preface, which were listened to by thousands of people in the mass rallies held by nationalists in Harlem. I spent a lot of time coming from work listening also to the street corner meetings of the various political parties and movements in Harlem. This was the days of the famed Scottsboro Boys frame-up. I was, like millions of Negro people, white progressives and people stirred by this heinous frame-up. I was impressed by the communist speakers who explained the reasons for this brutal regime against young Negro boys and who related the Scottsboro case to the struggle of the Ethiopian people against fascism and Mussolini's invasion. Friends of mine who were communists, although I didn't know it then, seeing my interest, began to have frequent discussions with me. I joined the party in February 1936 and was assigned to work in the YCL shortly after. My first assignment was secretary of the YCL, the Young Communist League, executive committee in Harlem, and it was about this time I got a job in the business department of the DW. This job coincided with my application for a $150 a week job in the field of dramatics with the Federal Theatre Project under WPA. I took the job at The Worker for $12 to $15 a week instead. During my teens, I was active in numerous social clubs in the community, in junior NAACP, in tennis clubs, and also studied dramatics at the Urban League. I performed in this capacity with a troupe in many churches in the Harlem community and in Brooklyn. The National Negro Congress first organizing conference had been held in Chicago. It was when I met James Ashford, outstanding young communist leader who died at the age of 27, that I was oriented to work in the youth movements in the YCL. During the next 10 years, from 1936 to 1946-7, I was active in the YCL and the youth movement. Served as organizer of the YCL in Harlem for a year. In 1937, I was sent on a 6-month training school to the CP, Communist Party. On my return, I was elected to National Council YCL and became associate editor of the Weekly Review. I was active in the work of the Great American Congress, the organization of National Council of Negro Youth, the Southern Negro Congress, where I attended many conferences in Alabama, Atlanta, Richmond, Virginia, and also in the National Negro Congress. Later, I became editor of the Weekly Review, 1938 to 40. During 1943 to 45, I became editor of Spotlight, national publication of American Youth for Democracy. This publication, many of whose articles were entered into the Congressional Record and for whom admirals and senators wrote, inspired the victory in the anti-fascist war among youth and was widely read by GI subscribers throughout the war fronts. Worked from 1945 to 46 as editor of the Negro Affairs Daily Worker, elected full member of the National Committee 1945 Convention CP. Assigned on graduation from youth movement to be Executive Secretary, National Negro Commission, CPUSA 1945-46. Arrested January 28, 1948, under ancient statute or warrant for deportation to my native Trinidad, British West Indies. Sent to Ellis Island, bailed out overnight, $1,000. Arrested June the 29th, 1951, with 17 working-class communist leaders, including Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, under the infamous Smith Act for writing an article which described the forward movement of Negro and white women in opposition to the fascist-bent world domination U.S. foreign policy. Bail $20,000. Rearrested under the Walter McCarran Law, October 1951. Held with 18 working-class and communist leaders on Ellis Island in special Walter McCarran wing for 18 days until bail was won, $5,000. From 1947 to 52, active in national women's movements and United Front movements such as Congress of American Women, National Council of Negro Women, Toward Nation, 43 states, in connection with the main party assignment of work among women, organizing party conferences of work among women, helping to implement this arm of our national committee's work among the masses of women, particularly working class and Negro women in struggle against the Korean War for peaceful coexistence between nations, for peace, national dignity, full equality for women, and the equal rights of women. This was basis of my overt act, an article I wrote printed in Political Affairs, which urged American women, Negro and white to unite lest their children like those in Korea suffer the fate of Hiroshima's atomic destruction. From 52 to 53, worked on National Peace Commission of CP, giving leadership activity to peace centers to peace struggle, namely around Korean War, for the program registered at Geneva for peaceful coexistence amongst nations, international friendship in a world of peace. July the 4th, 1953, at the end of trial of 17, suffered heart failure, diagnosed as hypertensive cardiovascular disease, hospitalized at Mount Sinai for 21 days. Took 3 months leave of absence, placed on digitals and drugs for control of hypertension, hospitalized again for coronary heart disease in December 1953, 2 months leave, returned to work again, served as editor of National Affairs Quarterly and special fields of work among Negro people, participated as member of NAC throughout this period. January 11, 1955, entered prison serving a year and a day sentence at the Federal Reformatory for Women at Alderson. Got 70 days off, serving 9 months and 18 days for so-called good behaviour. Won first prize Blue Ribbon on August State Fair of WA for women. Skills learned there. Was to be suddenly deported straight to the Caribbean from prison on October the 23rd, day of release of this year, but for protests here and abroad and intervention of British authorities. Brought suit for the first time in challenge to the Walter McCarran Act, which declares it a crime to be a non-citizen, even, or permanent resident alien, but was forced to withdraw my suit due to my health status, which is precarious and must be guarded. December the 9th, scheduled to leave the US after residing here for 32 years in the United States. I think this sort of summarizes it. I should add, happily, due to digitalized poisoning, while imprisoned, I was taken off digitalis August the 3rd, 1955, and have not had to use other than occasionally nitroglycerin for the heart pain, which I have used now for 2 months and only used on 2 occasions during the last year when imprisoned. Now on drug Supersil for control of hypertension. If you summarize the medical status, you should know that at the time of my imprisonment, admitted by a court-appointed physician, contrary to the attitude of the first women prison physicians, I was diagnosed as suffering from essential hypertension, cardiac disease, and coronary arteriosclerosis. With my background of arrested tuberculosis, the exact diagnosis of my personal physician. I wrote this quite fully in the full knowledge, dear Comrade Foster, that your extracts would contain only what you consider pertinent, but I gave it as fully as I can to facilitate that end. Best personal regards to you and Comrade Esther. Comradely yours, Claudia Jones. P.S. I was married to Abraham Sholnick in September 1940 in New York City. I was divorced February the 27th, 1947. My plans are to remarry in England within the next few months. P.P.S. At the age of 23, I applied and received my certificate for the first papers for American citizenship, but this was denied me by the US government since I was politically active from the age of 18. End of quote. And forgive oneself, I can't obviously relay in eloquence to the level and beauty that Claudia Jones spoke with. However, really interesting themes here, coming from a relatively middle-class privileged family. Because of the capitalist crisis there in Trinidad, they were forced and impoverished and forced to come as migrating working class people seeking a better life, like so many millions of others of our peoples, and then suffers a working class oppression. Her mum passes away, pressure on her father, health problems as a result of unsanitary living conditions of the open sewer under her residence, being pushed into really exploitative working class jobs to support herself and her family. Clear themes around the oppression of women in her own life in terms of her health, exploitation, employment, discrimination, being closed off on certain avenues that she rightly had a right to pursue, like again countless others of our people who are held back from their potential by racist systems. And then really just driving forward in a determined way, inspiring people in so doing with her developing of her revolutionary consciousness and then organization and then leadership. Amazing stuff. Looking forward to the next episode. Many thanks.